A blood-stained letter arrived in the small town of Piedraseca on a morning that promised death. The rider carrying it fell from his horse before even delivering the message, leaving in the air the mystery of who would be the next to fall in. That land where the sun burned like hot iron and vultures circled like prophets of imminent doom. The break of dawn, when the wind whispered forgotten promises across the dunes and the horizon turned red like an omen, Samuel Blackwood watched his arid land from the top of the hill. The man carried on his broad shoulders the weight of 42 summers, each one etched in the deep lines of his face burned by the merciless sun. His eyes, the color of aged whiskey, held secrets that even the desert dared not reveal. Dust danced in swirls around his worn boots, as if the land itself recognized in him an equal in solitude and resilience. Samuel was a man forged in the anvil of suffering, shaped by the sure blows of losses that still echoed in his chest, like the tolling of a cracked bell. The Blackwood Ranch stood stubbornly against the hostile landscape, its dry wooden fences creaking under the weight of time and neglect. His two sons also lived there, Thomas and Daniel, young men who inherited their father's imposing stature, but not the bitterness that hardened his heart. Thomas, the eldest at 23, had hands skilled with a lasso and an easy smile that disarmed even the most suspicious. Daniel, 2 years younger, had a gift for understanding horses as if he spoke their secret language, whispering words that calmed even the most skittish. Both watched their father with a mix of respect and concern, for they knew something had been eating away at old Samuel's soul since the death of his wife Martha 5 years prior. The arrival of that bloodied letter in the nearby town was the first sign that the winds of change were blowing over Piedraseca. The dying messenger managed to stammer only one name before expiring in the arms of Sheriff Watson, Rodrigo Valdez. It was a name that made brave men turn pale and women cross themselves 3 times. Valdez was known throughout the territory as a merciless man who had built his empire on the bones of those who dared cross his path. They said he collected debts like others collected trophies, and that he collected every cent with blood interest. Samuel heard the news when he went to town for supplies. Golden Dust Saloon was buzzing with speculation about the letter's contents and the fate of whoever its recipient was. The acrid smell of chewing tobacco mixed with the sweet aroma of cheap whiskey, creating a haze that seemed to slow thoughts and loosen tongues. It was there, between sips of warm beer and furtive glances, that Samuel first heard about the 3 Montoya sisters. Elena, Rosa, and Carmen Montoya were the daughters of Don Alejandro Montoya, a man who had once been prosperous, but now found himself cornered by insurmountable debts owed to Rodrigo Valdez. The sisters were known throughout the region not only for their beauty, which made men lose their train of thought, but also for their unique skills. Elena, the eldest at 25, had fairy hands for sewing and embroidered stories into every piece she touched. Her hair, black as a moonless night, fell in waves over her shoulders, and her brown eyes held the wisdom of one who had seen the world's cruelties too early. Rosa, 22, knew the secrets of the desert herbs and prepared remedies that healed everything from a rattlesnake bite to the deepest melancholy. Carmen, the youngest at 19, sang with a voice they said made even angels stop to listen, turning the darkest nights into moments of pure magic. The first time Samuel saw Elena was on an afternoon when the heat seemed to melt even the stones. She was at the general store in Piedraseca, her delicate fingers examining a fabric red as fresh blood. There was something in the way she held the cloth, as if she could see possibilities in it that escaped ordinary eyes, that made Samuel stop in his tracks. When their gazes met for a brief instant, it was as if the entire desert held its breath. Elena looked away first, but not before Samuel glimpsed in her eyes a profound sadness, the kind he recognized in his own reflection. Destiny began weaving its invisible threads when Don Alejandro, desperate and out of options, made the most terrible decision of his life. He summoned his daughters to the main room of the house that had once been grand, but now showed the cracks of decay, where peeling wallpaper told stories of past glories. With a trembling voice and eyes that dared not meet theirs, he announced that he had reached an agreement with Valdez. The 3 would be offered in marriage to the men the creditor chose, as partial payment of the debt. The silence that followed was more deafening than any scream. Elena raised her chin with a dignity that would make kings bow, while Rosa squeezed the hand of Carmen, who seemed to have lost the voice that enchanted crowds. The news spread through Piedra Seca like wildfire. On the day set for Valdez's men to arrive, the entire town seemed to hold its collective breath. Samuel was in the saloon when the group arrived, raising a cloud of dust that seemed to carry the smell of misfortune with it. There were 5 men, each more sinister than the last, led by Jake Morrison, Valdez's right-hand man, and known for collecting his enemies' ears. Morrison had a smile that didn't reach his dead eyes and hands that seemed always ready to reach for his revolver. It was when Samuel saw the 3 sisters being led out of their father's house, dressed in their finest clothes as if for a celebration and not a sacrifice, that something inside him broke and reassembled in a different form. Elena walked ahead, her back straight as if carrying the pride of generations. Rosa kept her gaze fixed on the horizon, while Carmen tried to hide the tremor running through her delicate body. The scene awakened in Samuel a fury he had thought dead with Martha, a primal need to protect that burned like hot iron in his chest. Thomas and Daniel were with their father on that fateful day. They watched, perplexed, as Samuel abruptly rose from the table where they were drinking and walked into the street with determined steps. The midday sun turned everything into harsh shadows and blinding light, as if the universe itself were divided between good and evil with no nuances in between. Samuel stopped before Morrison, his body casting a long shadow over the smaller man. For a moment that seemed like eternity. They measured each other with looks that spoke of past and future violence. Samuel's voice broke the silence like thunder in a clear sky when he declared that the Montoya sisters were not going anywhere with those men. Morrison laughed, a sound like the rattle of a rattlesnake about to strike. But the laughter died in his throat when Samuel continued, proposing a deal no one expected. He would assume Don Alejandro's debt and take the 3 sisters to his ranch, where they would remain under his protection until an honorable solution was found. The implicit challenge was clear as spring water. Anyone who wanted to dispute it would have to go over Samuel Blackwood's dead body. The tension in the air was palpable like the humidity before a desert storm. Morrison weighed his options, his eyes scanning the faces of the Piedra Seca residents who had gathered to witness the confrontation. Many were men who owed favors to Samuel, who had helped them through tough times without asking for anything in return. Sheriff Watson was among them, his hand resting casually on the handle of his revolver. Morrison could feel the balance of power tipping against him. With a growl of frustration, he spat on the ground at Samuel's feet and declared that Valdez would be informed of the insult. The threat hung in the air like a vulture circling a carcass. The Montoya sisters climbed into the Blackwood wagon in silence, each processing the sudden turn in their destinies in her own way. Elena cast a final look at the house where she had grown up, etching every detail into her memory like one saying goodbye to a loved one. Rosa clutched a small leather pouch containing her most precious herbs to her chest, the only treasure she had managed to save. Carmen murmured a nearly inaudible song, a sad melody that spoke of goodbyes and new beginnings. During the journey to the ranch, which lasted half a day under the relentless sun, Samuel kept his eyes fixed on the horizon, but his senses were attuned to every movement of the 3 women sitting behind him. Thomas tried to start a conversation with Rosa about the healing properties of a plant he had spotted along the way, receiving in response a half-smile that briefly lit up his face marked by worry. Daniel offered water from his canteen to Carmen, who accepted with a graceful nod of her head. Small gestures of kindness in the midst of chaos, like flowers that insist on blooming in the most arid desert. The Blackwood Ranch welcomed the sisters as the desert welcomes rain, with a mix of surprise and desperate need. The main house, built by Samuel with his own hands in the early years of his marriage, had enough rooms to accommodate the newcomers. As Samuel showed them the quarters, Elena observed every detail with sharp eyes. There were dusty photographs on the mantelpiece, one of them showing a woman with a gentle smile who could only be the late Martha. The house carried the ghostly presence of a loved and lost woman, every piece of furniture, every personal object speaking of an absence that still ached. On that first night, while the stars shone like diamonds scattered on the black velvet of the sky, Samuel found Elena sitting on the porch, her fingers working automatically on embroidery even in the dim light. He sat down at a respectful distance, the creak of the wood under his weight breaking the silence. For long minutes they remained like that, two wounded souls contemplating the vastness of the night desert. It was Elena who spoke first, her voice soft as the breeze blowing through the cacti. She thanked him for what he had done, but made it clear she expected no charity. She and her sisters would work to pay for their stay. They would contribute in every possible way. Samuel nodded, understanding the pride that motivated her words, the same pride that had prevented him from asking for help in the dark years after Martha's death. The routine on the ranch quickly adjusted to the sisters' presence. Elena took charge of the household with an efficiency that transformed the place back into a home. Her skilled hands mended not just torn clothes, but also the frayed fabric of domestic life. Rosa established a small medicinal herb garden behind the house, spending hours under the scorching sun cultivating plants that seemed impossible to grow in that ungrateful soil. Carmen, after days of silence, began singing again while doing her daily chores, her voice floating through the ranch like a balm for tired souls. Thomas and Rosa developed a friendship that surprised them both. He accompanied her on her morning expeditions to collect wild herbs, learning to identify plants that had previously gone unnoticed. Rosa, in turn, found in Thomas an attentive listener for her knowledge, someone who valued her wisdom without questioning her ability because she was a woman. On a particularly hot morning, when Thomas was bitten by a poisonous spider during one of these expeditions, Rosa acted quickly and precisely, preparing a poultice that saved his life. While she cared for him during the fever that followed, something changed between them, a connection that transcended gratitude. Daniel and Carmen discovered a common language in music. He had played the guitar since he was a child, an instrument Martha had taught him in happier times. When Carmen finally felt safe enough to sing openly, Daniel accompanied her, creating harmonies that made even the roughest ranch hands stop to listen. On a night when the full moon bathed everything in liquid silver, they sang together a song about love lost and found, their voices intertwining like vines in the desert. Elena, watching from the kitchen window, saw the sparkle in Daniel's eyes and knew that another kind of music was being born there. The closeness between Samuel and Elena was like the growth of a cactus in the desert, slow, cautious, but inevitable. It happened in moments stolen from daily life, in conversations that began about practical matters and drifted into deeper territory. Samuel discovered that Elena had lost her mother very young, taking on the role of caregiver for her younger sisters. Elena learned about Martha not through words, for Samuel rarely spoke of her, but through the silences heavy with longing that enveloped him like morning mist. The first truly significant moment between them occurred during a sandstorm that descended upon the ranch with biblical fury. The wind howled like 1,000 demons, and sand seeped through every crack, turning the air into a suffocating mass. Elena was in the barn checking on the animals when the storm caught her. Samuel, noticing her absence, ventured into the tempest without hesitation. He found her trying to calm a panicked mare, her black hair whipping her face, her eyes tearing up from the merciless assault of the sand. Wordlessly, for the wind stole all sound, he wrapped his coat around her and guided her back to the house, his body serving as a shield against the element's fury. When they finally reached the safety of the house, breathless and covered in dust, their eyes met, and something fundamental shifted between them. The threat of Valdez hung over the ranch, like a black cloud on the horizon. Everyone knew it was only a matter of time before the man came to collect what he considered his. Samuel increased security, posting trusted men at strategic points. Thomas and Daniel began carrying weapons at all times, their young faces hardened by the responsibility of protecting those who had become precious to them. The sisters were not helpless ladies waiting for salvation. Elena organized watch shifts among the women on the ranch. Rosa prepared medicine for potential injuries, and Carmen kept spirits high with her songs, which now spoke of courage and resilience. The second significant step toward closeness between Samuel and Elena happened one night when he found her in the office, studying the ranch's account books by the light of an oil lamp. Her nimble fingers ran over the columns of numbers with the same dexterity with which she handled needle and thread. When Samuel expressed surprise at her skill with numbers, Elena revealed that she had managed her father's household finances since she was 15, when her father had begun to lose control over the business. They worked together late into the night, she suggesting savings and improvements, he marveling at her sharp intelligence. When their hands accidentally touched over a document, neither of them immediately pulled away. The attack came on a morning when the fog still covered the valley like a shroud. 20 of Valdez's men, led by Morrison himself, surrounded the ranch before the sun had fully risen. The first shot came from a rifle posted on the hill, shattering the kitchen window where Rosa was preparing morning coffee. The chaos that followed was a symphony of shouts, gunfire, and splintering wood. Samuel commanded the defense with a general's precision, distributing men and ammunition with lethal efficiency. The women did not cower. Elena carried rifles for the shooters, Rosa tended to the wounded with steady hands, and Carmen helped reload weapons, her clear voice giving instructions amidst the pandemonium. Thomas was hit in the shoulder when trying to shield Rosa from a hail of bullets. She dragged him inside the house, tearing her own skirts to make bandages, her tears mixing with his blood as she worked to stop the bleeding. It was in that moment of desperation and closeness to death that Thomas confessed his love, the words coming out broken by pain. Rosa replied with a kiss that tasted of blood and promises. Daniel and Carmen found themselves cornered in the barn when a group of attackers tried to flank the house. Fighting side by side, she reloading the weapons while he fired, they discovered a synchronicity that went beyond music. When the ammunition ran out and the enemies closed in, Carmen began to sing, her voice rising above the noise of the battle. It was an ancient song from her land, speaking of warriors who did not fear death. The unexpected purity of her voice in the midst of the chaos made the attackers hesitate for a crucial moment, enough time for reinforcements to arrive. The decisive moment of the battle came when Morrison managed to enter the main house, finding Elena alone in the office. She held a pistol in hands that didn't tremble, the barrel pointed directly at his chest. Morrison smiled with that expression that didn't reach his eyes, confident that a woman wouldn't have the courage to shoot. He underestimated Elena Montoya, who had grown up in a land where survival often depended on quick, lethal decisions. When he advanced, she shot without hesitation, the precise shot throwing him backward. Samuel arrived seconds later, finding Elena still holding the smoking gun, her eyes dry but heavy with the weight of what she had just done. With Morrison dead and half his men cut down, the survivors retreated, carrying with them the news that the Blackwood Ranch was no easy prey. Samuel, wounded but alive, found Elena in the same spot where he had left her, now sitting heavily in the chair, the gun forgotten on the table. He knelt before her, his calloused hands covering hers, still stained with gunpowder. There were no words for the moment, only the mutual understanding that she had crossed a line for him, for all of them. When Elena finally raised her eyes, Samuel saw in them not regret, but an iron determination that mirrored his own. The battle left visible and invisible scars. Thomas would forever carry the mark on his shoulder, a physical reminder of the day he almost lost everything. But it was also the day he gained the certainty of Rosa's love, who didn't leave his side throughout his recovery. Daniel and Carmen discovered that the bond forged in the fire of battle was indestructible. Their songs now carried a depth that came from the understanding that they had faced death together and chosen life. In the following weeks, while the ranch recovered and fortified itself for possible new attacks, Samuel and Elena developed a routine of nightly walks. They began as necessary patrols, checking the perimeter and calming still tense nerves. Gradually, they transformed into moments of silent communion, two wounded spirits finding solace in each other's presence. It was during one of these walks, under a sky so clear it seemed possible to touch the stars, that Samuel spoke for the first time about Martha, He told how he had met her at a harvest ball, how she had laughed when he stepped on her feet during their first dance. He spoke of the golden years of their marriage, the birth of their children, the plans they had made for the future. And then, his voice choked with emotion, he recounted the sudden illness that took her in a matter of weeks, leaving a void he thought would never be filled. Elena listened in silence, understanding that she was receiving a precious gift, the trust of a man who had built walls around his heart. When it was her turn to share, Elena spoke about the burden of being the oldest, of watching the father who had once been strong and decisive turn into someone she barely recognized. She told of the nights she stayed awake calculating and recalculating the finances, trying to find a way out of the hole they were sinking into. She revealed the constant fear of failing her sisters, of not being strong enough to protect them. Samuel took her hand then, a simple gesture but heavy with meaning. In that touch there was the promise that she no longer had to carry the burden alone. News of Valdez's death reached the ranch on a hot autumn afternoon. The man, who had terrorized the territory for years, was found dead in his office, apparently a victim of one of his many enemies. With his death, the debts he held like chains over so many families lost their enforcement power. Don Alejandro was free, but the shame of what he had almost done to his daughters prevented him from seeking them out. He sent a letter through, Sheriff Watson, asking for forgiveness and stating that he neither expected nor desired their return. The Blackwood Ranch was now their home, if they wished it so. The sisters received the news with mixed feelings. The freedom they thought lost forever was within reach again, but they discovered they did not wish to leave. Rosa and Thomas had begun making plans to expand the medicinal garden, dreaming of providing remedies for the entire region. Daniel had composed a dozen new songs inspired by Carmen, each more beautiful than the last. And Elena had discovered that her place was beside Samuel, not out of obligation or gratitude, but by choice. Samuel's marriage proposal was as characteristic of him as the desert sunset. It happened during the routine work of cattle branding, when he suddenly stopped what he was doing and, covered in dust and sweat, took a simple gold ring from his pocket. It was Martha's ring, he explained in a hoarse voice, and she would have wanted Elena to have it. There were no flowery speeches or impossible promises, just the raw truth of a man who had learned to love again, offering his heart with the same honesty with which he had offered protection. Elena accepted with tears that shone like diamonds under the merciless sun. The kiss they shared tasted of new beginnings and fulfilled promises, watched by rough men who suddenly discovered they had something in their eye that needed rubbing. The news spread through the ranch like fire in dry straw, quickly followed by the announcement that Thomas had finally mustered the courage to ask Rosa to marry him, and that Daniel had done the same with Carmen. The Blackwood Ranch prepared for a triple celebration that would remain in the memory of all who witnessed it. The preparations for the weddings transformed the ranch into an anthill of activity. Elena, with her unparalleled skill, created the dresses for the three brides, each reflecting the unique personality of the one who would wear it. Hers was of elegant simplicity, with embroidered details that told the story of her journey. Rosa's incorporated elements of the medicinal plants she loved so much, small embroidered flowers that seemed to have a life of their own. Carmen's flowed like her voice, light and ethereal, with details that shimmered like stars when she moved. The ceremony took place at sunset, when the sky painted itself in impossible shades of orange, pink, and purple. The priest from the nearby mission, an old man who had seen much in his life, had tears in his eyes as he blessed the three unions. Carmen sang for all of them, her voice rising pure and clear in the still evening air, carrying promises of love and fidelity that transcended words. The ranch hands, tough as they were, blew their noses and blamed the dust. The women didn't bother to hide their tears. The party that followed was worthy of entering the history of Piedra Seca. Tables were set in the courtyard under the stars, laden with foods that represented the fusion of two cultures. Musicians came from afar and played until dawn, and even the shyest found the courage to dance. Samuel, who hadn't danced since Martha's death, led Elena in a slow waltz under the moonlight. his initially hesitant steps gaining confidence with each measure. Thomas and Rosa danced as if the world around them had vanished, lost in each other's eyes. Daniel and Carmen seemed to float above the dusty ground, the music they made together transcending instruments and voices. Don Alejandro appeared when the party was at its peak. Old and bent by the weight of his choices, he approached hesitantly, clearly uncertain of his reception. It was Elena who broke the ice, approaching her father and taking his hands in hers. The forgiveness she offered didn't erase the past, but opened the possibility for a future where he could know the grandchildren who would surely come. Rosa and Carmen followed their sister's example, and soon the old man was weeping, embracing the 3 daughters he had almost lost forever. The following months brought a peace none of them had dared to dream. The ranch prospered under the joint management of Samuel and Elena, who proved to be not only a loving companion, but a shrewd business partner. Rosa established an improvised clinic that drew people from miles around, her fame as a healer spreading like the roots of a mesquite underground. Carmen and Daniel traveled to neighboring towns performing at festivals and weddings, always returning to the ranch that was their safe harbor. The first pregnancy was Rosa's, announced on a spring morning when the rare desert flowers painted the landscape with improbable colors. Thomas nearly fainted at the news, much to everyone's amusement, but quickly recovered and spent the following months treating his wife as if she were made of fine china. Carmen followed soon after, and her singing during her pregnancy was said to have mystical properties, calming even the most skittish animals. Elena was the last to announce on a quiet evening when she and Samuel were watching the sunset from the porch. The joy in his eyes was like watching the sun rise after the longest night. The Blackwood Ranch transformed into a symbol of hope in a land often cruel and unforgiving. Tired travelers knew they would find there not just water and food, but genuine hospitality. The children born and raised there learned that family wasn't just about blood ties, but about choices made with the heart. Samuel, watching his grandchildren run across the same ground where he had once thought he would die alone and bitter, understood that sometimes you had to almost lose everything to gain more than you had ever dreamed possible. Elena often thought about that day at the market, when her eyes met Samuel's for the first time. How different everything would be if she had simply bought the fabric and left. If Samuel hadn't made the impulsive decision to protect them. But then she watched her family gathered for dinner, heard the laughter filling the house that had once been silent, and knew that some destinies were written in the stars long before they were born. The seasons passed in their eternal rhythm, each bringing its challenges and blessings. Droughts tested their resilience, storms their unity. But always, always they remained firm, roots intertwined like the hardy desert plants that Rosa cultivated with such care. The love that had blossomed in improbable soil proved stronger than any adversity, more enduring than the very mountains that surrounded the valley. Samuel died on a winter afternoon, 20 years after that fateful day at the market. He departed as he had lived in his final years, surrounded by love, with Elena, holding his hand and the sound of his grandchildren playing in the courtyard, coming through the open window. His last words were of gratitude for having lived long enough to learn that the human heart, like the desert, could seem arid and lifeless, but held within it the infinite capacity to bloom when touched by the right rain. Elena lived another 10 years, a respected matriarch of a family that had spread throughout the territory. When she finally joined Samuel, it was with the certainty that she was leaving behind a legacy of love and courage that would continue for generations. The stories of how 3 sisters destined for a terrible end found love and freedom in the most unlikely place became legend, told around campfires and passed from father to son. The Blackwood Ranch still stands, expanded and modernized but maintaining the essence of what it always was, a refuge for those in need. A testament that even in the harshest places and under the most difficult circumstances, love finds a way to take root and flourish. The roses that Elena planted on their first wedding anniversary still grow beside the house, defying the inclement weather with the same stubbornness as their planter. And when the wind blows across the plains at dusk, some swear they hear echoes of a song that Carmen used to sing. speaking of love that overcomes all barriers, and of hearts that find their true home in the most unexpected places. It is a song of hope in a land of hopelessness, of water in an infinite desert, of love where, before there was only survival. And you, when will you let hope bloom in your desert?